Rain mixed with spilled fry grease always smells like old pennies and regret. When Naomi saw the kid hit the asphalt, she didn't leap to the rescue out of some noble, bleeding heart instinct. She just didn't want a dead body on her sidewalk. She didn't know she was dragging an underworld empire through her front door. Fluorescent lights hummed with a sickly, rhythmic buzz that drilled straight into the space right behind Naomi's eyes. It was 2:14 a.m. Her shift had ended at midnight, but the mop bucket was full. The griddle was caked in burnt onions, and Arthur, the manager, had a habit of docking pay if the stainless steel didn't reflect his scowling face by morning. Naomi leaned her weight against the edge of the counter, feeling the dull ache radiate from her swollen arches all the way up her calves. She smelled like bleach and cheap coffee. Her natural hair, pulled back into a tight puff, felt heavy and damp from the humidity of the dish pit. With a heavy sigh, she tossed the grey, sour-smelling rag into a plastic bin. She just needed to take out the trash. Then she could go upstairs to her apartment, a shoebox that smelled eternally of mildew, and sleep for 4 hours before doing it all again. She grabbed the 2 heavy black garbage bags, dragging them towards the back door. The plastic stretched and squeaked. Outside, the rain was coming down in sheets, heavy and violent, slapping against the pavement and turning the alley into a rushing river of city filth. Naomi kicked the heavy metal door open. The cold air slapped her skin, raising goosebumps on her brown arms. She dragged the bags toward the dumpster, her cheap, slip-resistant shoes offering absolutely no resistance to the freezing puddles seeping through the worn soles. She hoisted the first bag. Heavy, a rogue chicken bone poked through the plastic, scraping her wrist. She muttered a curse, wiping the grease on her apron, and reached for the second bag. That's when she heard it. A soft, wet thud. Naomi froze. In this neighborhood, a noise in the alley at 2 a.m. usually meant a junkie finding a place to crash, or a stray dog digging for scraps. She didn't have the energy for either. She narrowed her dark eyes, peering through the curtain of relentless rain. Near the chain-link fence, a shadow detached itself from the brick wall. It stumbled forward, small and erratic. It wasn't a dog. Naomi tightened her grip on the edge of the dumpster. "Hey," she called out, her voice raspy from a shift of shouting orders over a noisy diner. "You can't sleep back here. Arthur will call the cops." The shadow didn't respond. It took another halting step, then abruptly folded in on itself. Knees hit the concrete. A small hand reached out, splashing into a deep, oily puddle, before the figure collapsed entirely, face first into the freezing water. Naomi didn't move. Every cynical instinct in her exhausted body screamed at her to go back inside, lock the heavy steel door, and mind her business. Helping people in this city only ever got you a knife in the ribs or an empty wallet. She looked at the door. It was 10 feet away. Warmth, safety. But the figure was so small. "Damn it!" she hissed through her teeth. She jogged over, the cold rain instantly soaking her thin pink uniform, pasting it to her skin. As she got closer, the neon sign from the street corner threw a harsh green glare over the boy. He couldn't have been older than 7. Naomi dropped to her knees, not caring that the oily water was soaking into her jeans. "Hey, kid, wake up!" She grabbed his shoulder and hauled him onto his back. He was unnaturally light, but his clothes were heavy, too heavy. She ran a hand over his jacket. Cashmere. Soaked, ruined cashmere. Underneath, a silk button-down shirt. The collar was stained with mud and something darker, thicker. Blood. He was trembling so violently his teeth chattered like small pebbles rattling in a tin can. His dark hair was plastered across a pale forehead, and his sharp, distinct features were tight with pain. Naomi's fingers went to his neck. His pulse was a frantic, erratic bird trapped under his skin. He was burning up. Okay, Naomi muttered, wiping the dirty rain from his face with her thumb. Let's get you inside. Come on. She slipped her arms under his armpits. He groaned, a tiny, ragged sound that pierced straight through her exhaustion. When she lifted him, her back protested fiercely. He was a dead weight, his small boots dragging against the asphalt. She hauled him through the back door, kicking it shut behind them with a loud, hollow clang that echoed through the empty diner. The sudden quiet was deafening, broken only by the boys' shallow, wheezing breaths and the steady dripping of water from their clothes onto the checkered linoleum floor. Naomi half-carried, half-dragged him into the cramped employee break room, laying him out on the sagging pleather sofa. The room smelled of old cigarette smoke and industrial cleaner. She grabbed a dry towel from a stack on the shelf and began roughly drying his hair. The boy flinched, his dark eyes fluttering open. They were glazed, unfocused. "Hospital," Naomi said firmly, reaching into her apron for her cracked smartphone. "I'm calling an ambulance." A small, freezing hand suddenly clamped around her wrist. The grip was weak, but desperate. "No," the boy croaked. His voice was raw, his accent thick and sharp, though she couldn't quite place it. "No police, no doctors." Naomi stared down at him. "Kid, you're bleeding and burning up. You're going to a hospital." "They'll find me," he whispered, his eyes rolling back slightly. "Please." His hand fell away, and he slipped back into unconsciousness. Naomi stood there in the harsh fluorescent light, water dripping from her nose onto her phone screen. She looked at the boy, then at the thick, dark stains spreading across the side of his expensive shirt. Her thumb hovered over the 9. She closed her eyes, letting out a long, ragged breath. "I'm going to regret this," she whispered to the empty room. She shoved the phone back into her pocket and turned toward the first aid kit mounted on the wall. Rubbing alcohol smelled like a hospital waiting room. It was sharp, clinical, and it burned the back of Naomi's throat. She knelt beside the pleather sofa, holding a wad of saturated gauze. "This is going to suck, kid," she murmured, though he was completely out cold. She carefully unbuttoned his ruined shirt. The fabric clung to a nasty, jagged gash along his ribs. It didn't look like a stab wound or a bullet hole, more like he had caught himself on a rusty piece of iron fencing while running for his life. It was ugly, inflamed, and oozing sluggishly. Naomi pressed the alcohol-soaked gauze to the wound. The boy jerked in his sleep, a sharp intake of breath hissing through his teeth. But he didn't wake. Naomi worked quickly, her movements unpolished but efficient. She wasn't a nurse. She was a waitress who regularly dealt with deep fryer burns and sliced fingers from line cooks. She knew how to stop bleeding. As she taped a thick bandage over his ribs, something heavy slid out of his jacket pocket and clattered onto the linoleum. Naomi paused. She picked it up. It was a heavy, matte black phone, far thicker than a normal smartphone. No brand name, no buttons, just a sheer glass face and a biometric scanner. Along with it fell a money clip. Naomi stared. The clip was solid titanium, and it was choking on a wad of $100 bills thick enough to choke a horse. Her heart did a slow, heavy thud against her ribs. Cashmere, a military-grade burner phone, 10 grand in walking around money, and a bleeding kid hiding in an alley. She dropped the money and the phone onto the cheap plastic coffee table like they were radioactive. Suddenly, the stale air in the break room felt suffocating. She stood up, pacing the 3 feet of available space, her hands on her hips, her damp uniform clinging uncomfortably to her skin. She needed to leave. She needed to drag him out front, call an ambulance from a payphone, and walk away. Before she could convince her legs to move, a sound cut through the steady drumming of the rain outside. It was a low, guttural purr. An engine, several engines. Naomi froze. She crept out of the break room, staying low behind the diner's front counter. She peered over the rim of the stainless steel pie case, looking out the front windows. 3 sleek black SUVs had just hopped the curb, parking illegally across the sidewalk, completely blocking the diner's entrance. The headlights cut blinding white swathes through the sheets of rain. Car doors slammed in unison. A heavy, synchronized sound that made the hair on Naomi's arms stand up. 5 men stepped out into the downpour. They didn't run for cover. They didn't hunch their shoulders against the cold. They moved with terrifying, deliberate precision. They wore dark suits, their silhouettes sharp and broad. One man walked ahead of the rest. Even through the rain-streaked glass, Naomi could feel the gravity of him. He was tall, violently imposing, moving with a controlled, predatory grace. The streetlights caught his features for a fraction of a second. Sharp jawline, dark, wet hair slicked back, eyes as cold and dead as shattered glass. He had the unmistakable, striking features of a man who owned everything he looked at and destroyed anything he couldn't. Dominic. Naomi didn't know his name, but she knew what he was. You didn't grow up in the rougher edges of the city without learning how to spot a predator. And this man was the apex. He didn't bother checking if the diner was open. He simply walked up to the glass door and kicked it right where the locking mechanism sat. The sound was explosive. The lock snapped, the metal frame warped, and the heavy door flew inward, crashing against the wall. Wind and rain immediately swept into the diner, bringing with it the smell of ozone, wet asphalt, and expensive, musky cologne. Naomi ducked lower, her heart hammering frantically against her sternum. Her hand blindly felt along the counter below the register. Her fingers closed around the cold, heavy steel of the meat tenderizer Arthur kept for unruly patrons. It was a ridiculous weapon against men who likely carried automatic firearms, but it was all she had. Heavy footsteps echoed on the linoleum. They were spreading out. "Clear the front," a voice commanded. Smooth, deep, and devoid of any emotion. The accent was faintly, almost imperceptibly, foreign. "Kitchen is empty, boss," another voice called out. Footsteps approached the counter. They were slow, deliberate. Naomi held her breath. The smell of wet wool and that dark cologne grew overpowering. Suddenly, a massive hand slammed down on the stainless steel counter right above her head. "I can hear you breathing," the deep voice said. It wasn't a shout. It was a murmur, quiet and deadly. "Stand up, slowly. Keep your hands where I can see them." Naomi tightened her grip on the meat tenderizer. Her hands were shaking, but a familiar, stubborn anger flared in her chest. She was tired. She was cold. She was broke. And she was absolutely done being bullied in her own place of work. She stood up. She didn't raise her hands. Instead, she leveled a furious, exhausted glare right at the man standing across the counter. Dominic stared back. For a fraction of a second, something like surprise flickered in his ice-cold eyes. He had expected a cowering line cook, a terrified teenager, or a rival thug. Instead, he was looking at a black woman in a hideous pink uniform, her apron smeared with grease and fresh blood, her natural hair frizzy from the damp, holding a meat mallet like she fully intended to brain him with it. "We're closed," Naomi said, her voice dropping into a flat, dangerous register that surprised even her. A man behind Dominic immediately raised a suppressed pistol, aiming it squarely at her chest. The sharp click of the safety being flicked off sounded like a thunderclap in the quiet diner. Dominic didn't look at the gun. He didn't look away from Naomi. He simply raised one gloved hand, 2 fingers extended. The man lowered the weapon instantly. Dominic's eyes tracked down from Naomi's defiant face to the blood smeared on her apron. The coldness in his expression fractured, replaced by something wild, panicked, and devastating. "Where is he?" Dominic demanded, his voice cracking like a whip. The polished veneer of the mob boss vanished, leaving only a desperate, terrified father. "Where is my son?" Naomi swallowed hard, her grip on the mallet slipping slightly in her sweaty palm. She looked at the men, the guns, the ruined door. Then she looked back at Dominic. "In the back," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "He's bleeding. And if you track mud on my floor, I swear to God I'll make you mop it yourself." Footsteps, heavy enough to rattle the cheap silverware in the plastic bins, thundered past Naomi. Dominic didn't wait for her to lead the way. He moved with a terrifying, single-minded velocity, shoving through the swinging kitchen doors so hard their hinges screamed. Naomi slowly lowered the meat tenderizer. Her hands were trembling now, the adrenaline spike beginning to crash, leaving behind a cold, hollow ache in her stomach. 2 of the suited men remained in the front, their eyes scanning the dark, rain-swept street through the shattered door. They ignored her completely. To them, she was just a fixture of the diner, no more threatening than the broken napkin dispensers. She followed the trail of wet footprints into the back. The cramped break room felt impossibly small with Dominic inside. He was on his knees beside the sagging pleather sofa, his expensive wool coat pooling in the dirty mop water Naomi hadn't gotten around to cleaning up. He didn't seem to care. All of his terrifying cold authority had evaporated the second he saw the boy. "Leo," Dominic breathed, his voice cracking. It was a raw, deeply human sound that felt entirely out of place, coming from a man who looked like he could snap a neck with his bare hands. His large, gloved hands hovered over the boy's small frame, afraid to touch him, afraid to break him further. He saw the crude, alcohol-soaked bandage taped to Leo's ribs. His sharp eyes darted up, locking onto Naomi as she leaned heavily against the doorframe. "What did you do to him?" Dominic demanded, the lethal edge bleeding back into his tone. "Cleaned it, taped it," Naomi said, crossing her arms over her chest to stop her shoulders from shivering. Her pink uniform was still plastered to her skin, freezing cold. "He was bleeding out next to the dumpster. You're welcome, by the way." Dominic stared at her, assessing. His dark eyes swept over her exhausted posture, the dark circles under her eyes, the sheer audacity of her tone. He opened his mouth to speak, but a sharp, ragged gasp from the sofa cut him off. Leo was waking up. The boy's eyes fluttered open, wild and dilated with panic. He tried to sit up, his small hands clawing blindly at the air. No, hey, lie still," Dominic coaxed, his hands gently gripping his son's shoulders. "Leo, it's me. You're safe." Leo fought weakly against the grip. "They found the car," the boy sobbed, his voice thin and reedy. "The driver, He told me to run. I know, Dominic said softly, smoothing the damp hair back from Leo's forehead. I know. It's over now. A man in a dark grey suit pushed past Naomi, carrying a heavy black duffel bag. He dropped it onto the coffee table, right next to the thick wad of cash and the burner phone, and unzipped it to reveal rows of medical supplies. Naomi watched as the medic quickly and efficiently peeled back her makeshift bandage. The man didn't speak, just worked with grim precision. Dominic stood up, stepping back to give the medic room. He turned to face Naomi. Up close, the sheer physical presence of him was suffocating. He smelled like ozone, expensive leather, and gunpowder. The harsh fluorescent light caught the sharp, angular lines of his cheekbones and the dark, fathomless depth of his eyes. You found him outside, Dominic stated. It wasn't a question. Yeah, face down in a puddle. Naomi shifted her weight off her throbbing left foot. Look, your guy is fixing him up. You have your kid. I need you all to leave before my manager gets here at 6. If he sees the door, he's going to fire me. If he sees you, he's going to have a heart attack, and then he's going to fire me. Dominic didn't blink. You have no idea who I am, do you? I know you wear a $5,000 suit to a diner in the middle of the night, and your people carry guns with silencers. Naomi met his gaze squarely, refusing to shrink back. That means you're exactly the kind of trouble I can't afford. I make minimum wage. I don't have the budget for a mob war. A muscle feathered in Dominic's jaw. It might have been amusement. It might have been anger. Before he could respond, the medic spoke up. Boss, the laceration is deep, but it missed the organs. However, his fever is spiking. Infection is setting in fast from the alley water. We need to move him to the clinic for IV antibiotics immediately. Dominic nodded once. Prep him. The medic reached down to lift Leo, but the boy suddenly thrashed, a fresh wave of panic washing over his pale face. No, Leo cried out, his hands grasping blindly. He didn't reach for his father. He reached toward the door, toward Naomi. Her, Leo wheezed, his small fingers hooking desperately into the air. She stayed. She fought the monsters. Naomi frowned. She hadn't fought any monsters. She had just threatened a very real one with a meat tenderizer. But in Leo's fever-addled mind, the woman who had dragged him out of the freezing rain was the only safe anchor in the room. Dominic looked at his son's outstretched hand, then slowly turned his head to look at Naomi. The calculation in his eyes was cold and absolute. No, Naomi said immediately, holding up both hands and backing away. Absolutely not. I am not getting in a car with you people. I have to mop the floor. Get your coat, Dominic ordered quietly. I don't want your money, Naomi snapped, her voice rising in genuine panic. I just want you out of my kitchen. If you don't come with us, he fights the medic. His heart rate spikes, and he bleeds through the sutures, Dominic said, stepping toward her. He didn't raise his voice, but the sheer weight of his tone pinned her in place. I will pay for your door. I will buy this entire building if it keeps your manager quiet. But right now, my son wants you. So, you're coming. Naomi looked at the boy. Leo was crying softly, his dark eyes locked onto her with terrifying, absolute trust. She let out a long, ragged breath, squeezing her eyes shut. She was too tired for this. She was so tired. If I get blood on my seats, Naomi muttered, opening her eyes and glaring at the billionaire mafia boss. You're buying me a new car, and I don't even own a car. Leather interiors always smell the same, no matter the price tag, It was a suffocating blend of new car chemicals, sterile air conditioning, and a heavy, underlying tension that made the hairs on the back of Naomi's neck stand at attention. She sat stiffly in the back of the SUV. Tinted windows blurred the torrential rain outside into a muted canvas of city lights. Beside her, Leo was strapped into a reclining seat, an IV line taped securely to the back of his pale hand. He was asleep, knocked out by whatever the medic had pushed into his vein. His small fingers remained locked in a death grip around the damp, grease-stained fabric of Naomi's pink apron. Dominic sat in the front passenger seat, a monolithic silhouette against the dashboard's glow. He hadn't spoken since the diner. The silence was heavier than the engine's low hum. Naomi stared out the window, watching her neighborhood. The barred storefronts and flickering neon signs fade into the rearview mirror. They were crossing the bridge, heading toward the glass and steel teeth of the financial district. "You shouldn't have brought me," Naomi finally said, her voice scratching the silence. "He's unconscious. He wouldn't have known." Dominic didn't turn around. His voice floated back, deep and impossibly calm. "I do not leave loose ends in alleys, and I do not deny my son the one thing that calmed him down." "I'm not a stuffed animal," she shot back, irritation flaring. "I'm a waitress with a double shift tomorrow, or today, whatever day it is now." "You are surprisingly arrogant for someone sitting in a car full of armed men," Dominic noted. He shifted, glancing back at her over his shoulder. Streetlights sweeping through the cabin illuminated the sharp, exhausted lines of his face. Most people would be begging for their lives. "Most people haven't worked customer service in this city," Naomi said dryly, resting her head against the cool glass. "You guys have guns. Big deal. Try telling a drunk construction worker we're out of hash browns at 3 in the morning. That's real terror." A low sound rumbled in Dominic's chest. It took Naomi a second to realize it was a chuckle. It sounded rusty, as if he rarely used it. The SUV descended into a private, subterranean parking garage, the heavy concrete swallowing the sound of the rain entirely. The vehicle rolled to a smooth halt. Doors opened in unison. The medic immediately unbuckled Leo, gently lifting the sleeping boy. Leo's grip on Naomi's apron held tight. "Just come," the medic murmured, glancing at her with a hint of sympathy. Naomi unbuckled her belt, wincing as her stiff knees popped. She followed them into the bright, sterile light of the garage, sticking close as they moved toward a set of private elevators. They bypassed the lobby, shooting straight up to the penthouse. When the doors slid open, Naomi stepped into a world she had only ever seen on television. The apartment was massive, dominated by floor-to-ceiling windows and minimalist furniture that looked horribly uncomfortable, but cost more than her life. They laid Leo down in a sprawling bedroom already converted into a makeshift hospital wing, complete with monitors and an oxygen tank. Naomi stood awkwardly by the doorway, her cheap, slip-resistant shoes leaving faint, muddy footprints on the pristine white rug. She felt intensely, violently out of place. She smelled like old grease and sweat in a room that smelled like wealth. Gently, she pried Leo's fingers off her apron. The boy shifted but didn't wake. "He'll sleep for a few hours," the medic whispered. Naomi nodded, turning away. She walked down the long, silent hallway, desperate to find an exit. She found Dominic in the kitchen instead. He had shed the heavy wool coat. Underneath, his black dress shirt was wrinkled, sleeves rolled up to the elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle and intricate, dark ink. He was pouring amber liquid from a crystal decanter. He didn't look like a boss right now. He looked like a man who had nearly lost his world tonight. He pushed a second glass across the marble island toward her. "I don't drink on shift," Naomi said, stopping a few feet away. "Your shift is over," Dominic replied. He didn't drink. He just stared at the liquid. "The men who attacked his convoy killed his driver. They meant to take Leo to force my hand on a territory dispute." "Why are you telling me this?" Naomi asked, wrapping her arms tightly around her stomach. "I don't want to know your business. Knowing your business gets people shot." Dominic finally looked up, his dark eyes locking onto hers with a frightening intensity. "Because you stepped between him and the dark. You did not run. You did not look the other way. You stood your ground with a piece of kitchen equipment against a strike team." "I was tired," Naomi muttered, looking away from his heavy gaze. "I wasn't thinking." "You were brave," Dominic corrected smoothly. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out a thick stack of banded bills and slid it across the marble counter. "This is for the door, and for your trouble. A car is waiting downstairs to take you wherever you wish to go." Naomi stared at the money. It was more than she made in 3 years. It could fix her life. It could get her out of that damp apartment. She felt a bitter, cynical knot tighten in her throat. She hated that she needed it. She hated that this man thought he could buy her silence, buy her bravery, with pocket change. She walked forward. She didn't take the whole stack. She pulled $300 bills from the top. $200 for the door repair," Naomi said, her voice flat. $50 for the ruined uniform, $50 for the cab ride home. Dominic's brow furrowed. "Take the rest." "No," Naomi said, slipping the 3 bills into her pocket. She looked him dead in the eye, her exhaustion suddenly replaced by a fierce, undeniable pride. "Because if I take it all, it means I work for you. And I already have a boss I hate. I don't need another one." She turned on her heel, her squeaky work shoes echoing sharply against the hardwood floor as she walked toward the elevator. She didn't look back. She knew exactly what she was leaving behind. Money, power, and a man who looked at her like she was the only real thing in a world of ghosts. Naomi just hoped her feet would stop hurting by morning. If you loved the intense dynamic between a fiercely independent waitress and a dangerous mafia boss, this story is just getting started. Naomi refused Dominic's money, but walking away from his world isn't going to be that simple. Will Dominic let her go, or has she already become his biggest liability? Drop a like if you want to see what happens next. Share this video with your friends, and hit that subscribe button for the next part.